Welcome to Show Me Sports Legacies. This is your host, Jeff Crowley. I'm here with Chris Hockenfels back in the studio, and we're going to talk tonight about some stuff that's kind of timely. It's the time of year when harvest starts, when we take the crops out of the field, and it finally the temperature kind of changes. And today's kind of one of those days that we managed to do this great because we got two farmers in with us today. And, you can't get them out of the field unless it's raining like it is today.
I've taken 2 road trips the last 2 weekends, Jeff, and driving through Illinois and Iowa, you start to see this time of year, the tractors, the combines, those themes that we've had this year in the podcast start to pop into mind about small town, community, farming, and how all of those things have played a role in sports. And all of the people that we've talked to, and more than one that have mentioned that the roots here, get that? I like that one. Yeah. The roots here through farming and through hard work and community have made their way into sports and are a big part of sports. And the things that you learn from doing these kind of things really help in your journey to being successful in sports and in life. So we've got a great show today to talk about some of those things and how those themes have woven their way through a lot of our podcasts.
And we're going to bring back some of those quotes and some of those stories because there are themes. And when we started out this podcast, we talked about small town roots and then turning that into success in the world of sports, whether it be officiating, whether it be coaching, scouting, playing. And we see all that. And what's interesting, how people refer back to those roots, as you say. And so we're going to talk about that today. And it's a timely subject. And we've got with us to talk about that, we bring back Alan Berry, who's been with us before when we did our Who Will Officiate the Games episode, and he was great in that. He now is our listener that I know mostly listens to us on tractors or in combines. So I give him all the credit in the world for that, and he's in that niche of our listeners that combine that work and recreational listening. So appreciate that. Alan's with us today. Welcome, Alan.
Hey, thanks for having me back. I'm looking forward to it, guys.
And another guy that he knows and he's officiated with, Brad Tolson, has been with us with our episode with Ainsley, with his daughter, and that odyssey of her career and the fabulous things that she did and his role in that as a parent and a coach. And I know he's also officiated with Alan, and he just happens to know a lot about farming as well. And believe me, if this episode was based on my knowledge of farming, it would be a very short episode. So I welcome Brad to the program.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here again. Some of my good friends, I didn't know if I would ever get a chance to sit in the corner again. I heard that Alan was going to be here, and so I was hoping it was going to be about, this is your life, Alan Berry, and talk about all the calls that everybody loved when he was refereeing and all that. But I'm looking forward to the farming theme here and look forward to it.
Okay. We could do that. This is your life anytime. And we do that with a lot of people when we bring them in and we kind of spring things on them. But we won't do that to you tonight.
I appreciate that. But I would be willing.
One of the first things we're going to do is we're going to bring up some clips. And my first clip that I'm going to do is with Dr. Andy Peterson from Galt, Missouri. He was an excellent player at Grundy R5. He was an excellent player at Northwest Missouri State University, and he parlayed that into coaching career in golf and in basketball, and then ultimately became director of athletics at Northwest Missouri State, where he sort of lived out his dream. And we called that episode OAB, AAB. Once a Bearcat, always a Bearcat. Dr. Andy Peterson leads the NWMSU Bearcats into a new era. And in this clip, he talks a little bit about comparing summers on the farm to going to school.
Most of us were farm kids. I tell people a lot, and it may or may not be true as well, but I felt like I got to sleep in to go to school. The summertime is when Dad had us up and at it and going and haying and picking up straw and like all that stuff. Like, man, I tell my kids all the time, I used to love school. Pawpaw was mean when I was young, he used to let me, we get to sleep in to go to school.
Our second piece here is Andy talking about the common sense aspects of farming and what he learned, issues that he learned to deal with that helped him ultimately with his sports career.
And common sense stuff, and I'm not bragging about it, it's just like when you're on the farm, it's just there's a lot of common sense that rolls into it. There are consequences for what you do on the farm, whether it's with grandpa, dad, uncle, or just with the animals, or physics with heavy stuff and gates. You're just kind of exposed to a lot that really kind of helped me out as I went through my academic career.
Tell us what it's like to be a farmer, what the elements do to you, what the equipment is, what you have to plan out, and what you have to deal with sometimes that you didn't expect you'd have to deal with?
Well, I tell you what, Dr. Andy Peterson, I changed his diapers as a kid. His mom and dad and I and my wife Linda, we all went to high school together, lived 1.5 miles apart, going through farming and helping each other. Andy's right. Common sense is you just got to have a lot of it on the farm. And there's also a thing that I used a lot on the farm was 6th sense. And if that just didn't feel right, we're not going to do that. And I learned that from my dad. Dad said, we're not going to do that, The 6th sense was a big part of my growing up through the 70s, of learning how to farm. Of course, the technology was not there then like it is now. But Andy was right. They went to school, me and Brian. Of course, I was at work. Brian was milking. But when I got home, we was helping each other. There wouldn't be nothing to come home on a July day after the wheat's been harvested, and Brian's got 1,000 square bales to pick up, and everybody in the country takes their truck and wagons, and everybody goes down there and starts picking up hay and straw for them. So the dairy farm was probably real hard work. Those lights was never shut off. I was fortunate enough to be row crop and cattle and hogs to where my lights got shut off at 10 o'clock at night or 11. But sometimes they didn't have to. And the Petersons, they worked very hard on the farm.
I remember my great uncle was a dairy farmer, and his farm lights were visible to his buddy, who was another dairy farmer, and whoever flipped on those lights first got bragging rights. Okay. So they'd see each other later, and he goes, "What were you doing? Sleeping in? It's 4:45 and your lights weren't on." I remember those kind of exchanges. I know it's just a lot of hard work.
When you think about Andy and the Peterson family, it's one of those families that's been a fixture in this area for a really long time, and a family that everybody could look to as a great example. And I know that the parents there set a great example for those kids, not just you're going to go do this, but we're going to go do this together. And they modeled that, the whole time that they were growing up. And with it being a dairy, and they were able to have those jobs that young people can do. I think a lot of times in modern row crop farming now, a lot of the work's done on a really, really, really expensive, big, humongous piece of equipment. And even when I was a kid, we had hogs and livestock, and there were things that a kid could do, and I think that livestock farming really lends itself to that. So I know that growing up on livestock afforded them those opportunities, and kind of leads to that sense of hard work and dedication and responsibility.
Well, I'm a city kid. You guys know that. I was born and raised in Phoenix and Arizona and Flagstaff, but I did start coming out here when I was about 13 and working on the Brinzer farm, and learned real quick what it was like to work hard and also problem solve, where you were kind of maybe put out in a field by yourself and told, we'll be back in 4 hours to pick you up. And if something goes wrong, you have to find a way to fix it. I painted a lot of fence to tell you what my skill level was at that point. But, if something happened, something breaks, something, you were on your own and you figured it out, and you wanted to tell the person that came back to pick you up in the pickup that you got the job done. And I thought that was real important, that you learn that I've got to finish a job and be proud of it. So when that person comes back, I can tell them I did it and I got the job done. And so when those things start to translate later in life, they really start to pay off.
Okay, our next clip here is from Mark Curp, a 9-time All-American, world record holder in the half marathon from Polo, Missouri, of all places. And he is talking about, in this episode, it was in season 2, episode 18, so fairly recently, pushing the pace. Mark Curp runs from North Missouri's backroads to a world record. And he's talking about working on the farm. Mark, what can you tell me about your early memories of life in Polo, Missouri?
Well, it was being on a farm, and it was not a high-tech farm, which there wasn't much high-tech back at that point in time. But it was challenging, hard. I didn't know at the time, really didn't know how hard it was. But we raised pigs and cows, and then raised row crop too, mostly soybeans, corn, and milo or grain sorghum. I grew up doing chores in the morning before school.
Yeah.
And I'd go to school, then practice sports, and then come home and do chores again at night, and then rinse and repeat and do it again the next day.
Something that was interesting what you said about you didn't realize. I mean, it was just what we did.
Yeah.
It wasn't high tech. You didn't really realize that we worked very hard.
Yeah.
It's what everybody did.
Yeah. To make it faster, when I would carry either grain or, usually it was grain, I'd get 4 5-gallon buckets, put grain in each one, and I'd carry 2 on each side so I didn't have to make 2 trips. So
Smart.
See, that's what started it right there.
That's right.
That's how Mark Curp became who he was. Grain buckets.
that's how my arms got so long and I didn't grow very tall early on.
So Mark's talking about grain buckets, and my buddy Brent Martin joined in on that one. He's a longtime newscaster and at KFEQ radio currently, but he grew up in Cowgill. They went to church together in Cowgill. So buckets, okay? Buckets. There's a theme. Okay, we're going to have another one here that involves buckets, of all things. And this is Sierra Michaelis, Mercer prolific scorer, second all-time in Missouri girls basketball, 3-year starter at Mizzou, and one of the best players to ever come out of this part of the world. Here's where she's talking about the weightlifting facilities at Mercer.
Mercer doesn't even have a weight room. I was not lifting weights. I didn't even know what to do, even if I were to have a weight room. So I just lifted hay bales and 5-gallon buckets my entire life growing up on a farm.
So there you go. We got buckets. You got any bucket stories or?
Well, yeah, I got all kinds of them. In fact, what is this, 2025, and I've fed around 75 head of calves in buckets today. So, yeah, I'm still doing that, but it's not hard work as hard as it used to be. Yeah, when I was a young kid, 15, 16, I'd put 2 5-gallon buckets in each arm and take off walking through mud up halfway to my knees and get to the feed bunk and fall over them and spill half of it. And, you know, we get some of it in there and the calves are running over you, this and this and that. We didn't have we didn't have the money to do what we do now. You know, today I take them buckets out there in my gator and I drive up to the cement bunks and I dump them in there and the calves reach through the fence and they eat. And, you know, I sit there and I'll take pictures of them and send them to my sisters and say, oh man, this is just beautiful watching these calves eat. When Dad was alive, Dad and I could sit and watch calves eat all day long. Now I've even got one with a handyman on it, which the handyman is I could just let the thing down, hit a button on the gator and drive along and fill the concrete bunks. You know, it's really a lot higher tech. It's a lot easier too. The only problem is I don't have it fixed where I can dump it into the handyman yet. I got a bucket of it in there. So, but yeah, buckets has been a life for me my whole life. I'm not ashamed of it. I love it. I wished I had $1 for every calf Dad and I sold feeding them out in buckets. I'd have a lot of money if I just had $1 for them, because I started doing this when I was 6, 7 years old, and I'm 66 today, or 66 now, not today, but yeah, I love buckets.
You got any low-tech stories from the farming world?
Gosh, yeah. I think that, you know, most of us grew up that way. It's interesting because, you know, like I said, you know, my kids really didn't grow up with that because we didn't have the livestock, but I remember when we were doing the podcast with Ainsley, her talking about, you know, oh my gosh, all the free throws. I wish I knew how many free throws I shot. I wish I knew how many buckets I've dumped, you know, when we had all of those hogs and everything. I mean, it's interesting when you think about all the weight lifting that the kids do and cross training. And I've watched people on TV. It's not something that I'm inspired to do, but, you know, flipping tires over and stuff at football practice and things like that. And I mean, dumping buckets and carrying buckets and bucking bales and, you know, throwing bales up in a hayloft and stacking them on a trailer and bedding hogs and, you know, just all the things that you would just naturally need to do on the farm, especially a livestock farm. The best cross training a kid could ever want. I think a lot of those kids back in the day came to school and they didn't really need to lift weights. They were farm tough.
Yep, that's exactly right. You know, just outstanding work. Love it. Can't get enough of the farm.
And how is there not a traveling team in Northwest Missouri that has the name 5-gallon buckets? I think I want to trademark that. So if anybody out there wants to use the name for your team, 5-gallon buckets, because buckets, basketball.
Buckets.
Yeah, come on.
Sierra made 1 million buckets.
That's right. That's got to be on a T-shirt somewhere.
I think so. Now, my hay hauling career pointed out 2 things. One is I was tall, so I could throw them up pretty high in the morning. Okay. By the afternoon, I was pretty worthless because I probably weighed 155 pounds most of my high school years. And then 2, my uncles and my grandfather, who farmed, would lie to me about how strong I was to get me to stick with it and throw those bales high. But
smart is what they would call it.
It was coaching.
Right. And your new nickname from now on is Morning Buckets.
Morning Buckets.
You know, one other thing real quick on the farm, Brian Peterson and I, we've been together a long time. But, you know, back, and this was probably in the late 80s, early 90s, I can't remember, he can tell you. But they come up down at the State Fair with the farmer contest. That sucker won it the first year. He won that super farm. I call it
Super Farmer. Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
I was thinking about how I've watched, with our kids going through school, some of the guys that have been very dedicated to the weight program in high school and just really, did everything that they were supposed to do, and the transformation that you can see in a high school boy in 1 year. But when I was in high school, the strongest, toughest guys that I ever met were the guys that were on a hay crew all summer, and they didn't get this big upper body and no leg thing going or anything like that. I mean, they were tough all the way up and down, and the most physical, strongest guys I ever met were on a hay crew all summer.
Yeah. And the second thing I'll say about the clips you've already played, three kids, Andy, Ainsley, Sierra. I had no better kids on the basketball court in my life than I had them kids on the court with me. I mean, you could call anything on them, and they'd turn around and hand you the ball.
Yeah.
Good kids.
Thank you for saying that, Alan.
Yeah.
Just solid. Just solid. Okay, here we go. And this is another one from Mark Curp from Polo about how college was a little bit easier than farm work. We were looking for distractions, and we did our academics, but if we had free time, we didn't necessarily apply it to something else like that.
It was a little more disciplined. Well, you had to be, though.
Oh, yeah.
You had to be, because you did not have to do your academics and to do your running. You had to be very disciplined.
Mm-hmm. If you wanted to do well.
Right. I mean, there just wasn't any time.
And growing up on a farm, you're used to hard work. And so when I went to college, it was like a breeze. I mean, I didn't have to get up in the morning to go do chores. I went out for a run, but it took 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And then go back again in the afternoon. And then it was just study. And it was, to me, in my mind, it was easy compared to the stress of doing stuff on the farm.
Easy. Easy to run 10, 12 miles, compared to doing that. Now, the sixth cut comes from our episode from season 1, episode 9, about the Trenton Bulldogs and Black Berets, 1966 Missouri State champs. And here we got John Hamilton and Rich Griffith talking about kids that had to work. I mean, they just didn't have choices back in those days to participate in sports.
Mike Norton, they'd run him in at fullback, and he was the biggest kid on the team. And a story about Mike had moved back to town, but he was living with this family. I think his mother had passed away, and he was living with this family, and he had to work. He was working at High V, and they wouldn't let him off for practice. Coach Campbell worked out a deal. He sought Mike out and says, "Mike, do you want to play football this year?" He says, "Yeah, Coach, but I have to work." "Well, go down and see Paul Jackson down at the gas station. He'll give you a job." And so he went down and talked to him. He gave him a job, let him come in and work after practice and everything. And that's how we got Mike on our team. And Mike was a big part of that defense.
Yeah, he's the biggest guy, weighed 210 or 220, something like that. But we had a lot of players, not a lot, but I mean, there was certain talent in the community that had to go home and work, never got to play football. There was a lot of them had to have jobs, milk cows, work on the farm, or just have a job, just like what John was talking about. So there was some that, they're great fans, but would have really been good football players that never got to play because their dad or their parents, they just had to work.
I knew some kids like that. I also knew the kids that had the allure of they wanted to have a car. In 1966, you had to make choices sometimes. Families have to make choices. Sports wasn't as prominent. I mean, we live sports now. But back in those days, I think it was harder to justify to parents sometimes that this was worthy of their time and attention.
Yeah, when I was coaching in the 90s and early 2000s, I had some of my players come up to me and say, I can't play anymore, or, early in the season say, "This is not for me because I've got to work, and my parents told me I have to work because our family won't make it unless I work, and I can't just go to practice every night and make that a priority." So even later than 1966, not sure about now because I've kind of been out of it for a little while, but that tone of I've got to work for my family so we can make it in a small town in a community like Trenton or Galt or Polo or Cowgill was there.
So this next clip is once again Andy Peterson. You work on the farm, but every now and then you find a basketball.
All of them, really. We grew up on a dairy farm just east of Trenton, actually, just north of Laredo. About 3 miles is where the family dairy's at. Still there. Both of my brothers are still there farming. My dad has semi-retired, I think, maybe on paper. He's still farms every day, but he's still pushing through things. Yeah, I grew up right there. So being on the farm, we had plenty of space. I had 2 brothers, one older, one younger, that weren't as interested in sports as I was, but they were interested in goofing around and playing. So anytime I could get them to play something, we played. We played a lot of baseball with tennis balls. We played, a lot of catch with football and frisbees and road bikes and all that stuff. But we just did a lot of stuff outside. But I really spent most of my time on the basketball court. Right outside the back door was just a gravel driveway parking lot there by the house that Dad had put a hoop in for me. And so I spent a lot of time dodging elm tree roots with my feet and with my dribbles to try to keep it going. But I spent a lot of time shooting hoops when I was younger. And
so, yeah, there's work, but when we got a break, if the hoop's nearby, we're going to bring out the basketball. We're going to shoot some hoops. Okay, this next one is Carl Carpenter, who is in the episode For Love of the Game, Building the Legacy of Trenton Tennis, Season 2, Episode 11. And I asked Carl what it was like to live on the farm back in New York State. I always like to find out the backstory. And so you grew up in rural New York State. What was life on the farm like? And was there any sports involved in that at all, or was it mostly work and school?
No, we had lots of sports activities. We had basketball and played a little baseball. Did a lot of swimming. My dad liked to swim, and lots of times after we'd worked in the field all day, we'd head for a nearby lake and take a swim rather than take a bath in the bathtub.
Okay, so choices here. Jumping in the pond after a long day. I mean, that's an age-old thing, isn't it? You guys have done some of that kind of stuff, I imagine.
Yeah, when I was listening to Andy speak there, it brought back memories, from, I think that when you grow up on a farm, it's different than the kids in town. I hear about, all the kids got together and played football every day and all of that. And for me growing up, really rural, a long way from any town, there weren't any neighbor kids to play with. And so I think back to, after all the work was done at night, I was fortunate enough to have a basketball goal with a light and just shoot the basketball and shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot. And I think that, nowadays a lot of kids play a lot of basketball, but there aren't as many kids that spend hours and hours and hours and hours by themselves just shooting a basketball and developing that skill. And my basketball quote unquote court was also where my dad worked on equipment. And so there were some really fun, challenging kind of obstacle courses to shoot around with equipment there. And if you missed the wrong side of the basket or something, it was going to hit off that equipment and then it was going to roll under something else and you're going to have to go crawl in there under it. And I just remember actually it was just kind of therapeutic for me to go out and just shoot baskets of a night by myself. And it's something that maybe not a lot of kids see now with all the organized sports that they have at such a young age.
My dad would always put a goal up for me, and we lived out in the country. So I'm a country kid, but I'm not a farm kid. So I would wear out, and you could tell my shooting range by what I wore out around the thing. It's about 30 feet. So, I'm out there just bombing away, probably 500 to 1,000 shots a day. But, I always tell my players the same thing. They go, what do I need to do to be a better shooter? I go, hundreds of shots per day.
Well, the Rich Griffith deal kind of took me a little bit. I think you guys know this, but he was my coach, high school basketball coach when I was a junior. We was pretty good, and Rich was pretty good with us. We had a good time that year, and I loved that segment when he was talking about the football team. George Moore was also one of my coaches, and I go back to those days a lot. And I was fortunate enough, like Brad, I would shoot baskets wherever I could shoot baskets at. I had one outside, had one inside a barn. It hit off a piece of equipment, knock a hole in the baskbasketball. Dad needed another basketball. Dad would come up with it. And the other thing my mom and dad did for me, it didn't matter. It didn't matter what time or what time of the year. When it was time to go play sports, we went and played sports. And we made sure the cattle and the hogs were all fed. And if it was harvest time or planting time, the tractors shut off and we went and played.
That's cool. Yeah. That's really cool.
And I will throw a tie in there for myself that didn't grow up on a farm, but my dad always made sure we had a hoop where I grew up in our driveway, which was concrete, and had a light, and I would spend my nights out there shooting. So even though some things are different the way you grow up, some things are the same. Your dad making sure you had a hoop to shoot on. And I also took some notes here. Brad, so you're saying skill development's important. Is that right? And
Yeah,
basketball.
I think so.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think
Good.
there
Good.
needs
Kind
to
of
be a
note taken. Yeah.
balance there, but you've got it. Yeah.
Okay, so this next segment, we're going to talk about the small town. Some of this stuff is just kind of fun. And here we go with Dr. Andy Peterson talking about what it was like when he came home to visit from college.
Yeah, the Republican Times used to have the deal where the lady would call her 2 or 3 or 4 best friends and get all the dirt from that township,
That's right.
And you guys remember the phones?
Yeah.
I can remember picking up the phone, and it was grandma who lived half mile up the road talking to somebody that lived a half mile down the road the other way.
Sure.
The shared line, you bet.
The shared lines,
Yeah.
And then all the ladies would, they're cooking dinner or whatever they were doing, and they were all talking to each other. And if you had to make a phone call, hey, grandma, I got to make a phone call. So she'd hang up, you make your phone call, then you'd call grandma back. And so she could give it. Yeah, it was all over all the time. Yeah, it was a big deal when the college kid came home or for some reason.
Yeah, sometimes I think even the girlfriends would get named that came back to visit and had Sunday dinner with the family. It was like an open book. You didn't get away with much out there in Galt, did you?
No, small town is where I'm from. I was very proud. I'm very proud that I made the top 10 of my graduating class out of the 13.
Good work.
Yeah, the small town was perfect for me. Brad and I both listened to Rich and them talk about the guy that had to go get a job, and that's how they got him on the football team. Well, our job was on the farm. My dad, and I'm not speaking for Brad's dad, but I'm sure their job was you make sure that them hogs are fed, you make sure that these calves are fed or whatever. That was our job. And if we got that job done, then we was rewarded. Yeah, you can go to town tonight. You can take your girlfriend out or whatever you wanted to do. But as far as coming in here and looking for flipping boogers at Hardee's or somewhere, that we wasn't looking for jobs. We had jobs right there on the farm. And I just can't, and I know Brad will back me up on this, I just can't give enough thanks to my old man for teaching me how to farm. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have made it farming. The technology today, you guys probably don't know this, but I have retired from row cropping, and Brad and Chad are farming all the ground that I farmed, and I sure like watching them guys work. I haven't missed it.
What a great experience.
Yeah. I planted my first crop as a freshman in high school with 50 acres in 1974, and I planted my last one in 24, and I sure like watching you guys work, Brad.
Yeah. Well, I also have been lucky enough to never have another job but the one on the farm. And so it's a blessing that I know that you were able to have, Alan, and I have as well, to be able to work your whole adult life with your dad. It's a really big blessing, and we both were really blessed to be able to do that. I was going to tell a story earlier. There was a story there about the lights, coming on and stuff like that. And then I was talking about, the example that the Petersons set for their kids. And there's a story about my dad where he was kind of notorious for working late hours, and he'd kind of take care of the livestock in the day and then kind of farm at night. And so there was a neighbor that lived between him and one of the farms that he was farming, and the neighbor would kind of judge when it was time to go home by when my dad would come home. And so Dad was on a cabless 2510 tractor, for those of you that know what that is. And it was maybe midnight or 1 a.m. and he come by the neighbor's farm. And so the neighbor thought, okay, I can go home now, thank goodness. And so he went in and got a shower and was getting ready for bed. And about the time that his head hit the pillow, my dad went back by. He had went home to fuel the 2510, and he was going back out. So yeah, I've had lots of great examples of hard work. I should probably be better than I am, with the example that's been set for me.
Well, even the Carl Carpenter talking about going to the pond. I baled hay. I started baling hay when I was 11. That would have been in 71. And I burnt my first baler up at the age of 12, caught it on fire, and backed it off into a pond. But I can remember on that D17 and a 4020, we would bale with both of those tractors, whichever one was available. And I can remember having so much hay dust on me that I went to the pond with my Daisy Dukes, had them in the glove box, because he didn't wear shorts back then. He was fully dressed, but I don't go a day on the farm without shorts unless it's a zero.
But you don't call them Daisy Dukes, do you?
Not anymore. No.
Okay, all right, just checking.
That's good. Okay, so here we've got a fun story about, this comes from our episode with Bryce Garnett and Chad Sullinger about Gallatin Golf, Titletown, a 20-year era of small school dominance in Season 2, Episode 14. And this is, we're just kind of teasing him when I did some research, and I was looking for their picture in the paper after they won their third consecutive state title and their sixth in 20 years. And this is what I found in the paper. You go on and win that third straight title that eluded Bryce and that group. And you guys are on the front page of the paper, but I got to tell you, I've looked at the microfiche of the paper. Well, it's not microfiche. It's actually online. Trenton stuff is on microfiche. And the headline story on the front page is not you guys. You're on the page, but there's no picture until you get all the back to page 16. The headline story is some guy who showed up with a longhorn steer head and horns and was showing it around town. And it's like front page, above the fold stuff. And I thought, man, is that the most small town thing you've ever heard in your life? You know,
someone had to make that decision, right, in the copy room or the editor's room of the paper. Like, okay, which one we going with? We're going with the guy with the horns. Yeah.
I mean,
hopefully he's not still editing.
Right.
I don't know, but that seems like a questionable call when you win 3 straight state championships and you don't get your picture with the trophy on the above the fold on page 1. We just laugh about it, but there's some small town quirks and eccentricities, and that was a great example of how the newspaper took it pretty seriously, but their pictures on page 16. The guy that just showed up with the longhorn steer head and horns made the front page. Good for him. Good for him.
Well, that was kind of a more unusual sighting. After all, they'd won state 2 times before.
Old story. That's an old story. Golf's an old story. We got something new.
Little bit of that on the farm. Always somebody kind of putting you in your place a little bit. I had plenty of that growing up. My dad had a hired person that helped us all the time, and in the makeshift gym that I was telling you about, where I shot around equipment, I had gotten skilled enough to shoot the basketball between 2 different sets of rafters and still make a basket. And so I wanted to show that to my dad's helper, Johnny, there one day. And he said, "You're not going to be able to do that." And I did it. And after I got in, he said, "Yeah, that's pretty good. You might make the girls team someday." So you're always going to get a little bit of that.
Nobody's impressed.
Yeah. When I came back to Trenton and was at that point dating my soon-to-be wife, getting used to living in a small town was difficult, to say the least, because of all the quirks. And I can remember having conversations about, what are we going to do in the small town tonight? And she said, well, what we do every night, and that's cruise. And I go, what do you mean by that? And she goes, well, we just drive around town. I said, in circles? Like, yeah, well, it's a kind of a big circle. I go, in the same pattern? Yeah, same pattern. All night? Yeah, probably 2 or 3 hours. I said, oh, well, okay, then what about tomorrow night? Well, we'll cruise again tomorrow night too. So it's definitely something to get used to, all the different things in a small town. But when you raise your kids in a small town, it becomes, you're on the other end, and all the great things and values that you can instill and your kids learn about community and hard work. Always fun to think about, not just a small town, but coming from maybe a big city and experience a small town for the first time.
There's all kinds of stories, and one that sticks in me, you talk about the cruising in my 1971 Grand Torino. It was all jacked up, my 10-inch steering wheel on it. And
nice.
There was a guy up north of town here, north of Trenton. His last name was Brown. He raised the best watermelons. So Linda, my wife, and I was not married, but we would sneak up there just off of Route O, load up 2 or 3 big old watermelons, come back down and go to White's Auto Supply, which is where Thompson River Ag is, right there before you cross the viaduct now. We'd sit right there and eat watermelons, and we would start with just us 2, and by the time we got to 3 watermelons, there'd be 15, 20 people there. That was cruising your loop, making that circle. And
then they saw the watermelon.
Yeah, they come in. They knew Berry had been stealing watermelon. So Rex Brown, he was a great man, lived north of town. He raised the best watermelons. He did shoot in the air one night at it.
And chances are he knew about that and probably put the nicest ones right out there for you so you could take them, because that's how people in the community are.
It was. Yeah. And then when I worked for Grundy, there were several times that I got deals with Rex, and he says, I never shot at you. But he said, I was glad you were stealing them. I knew they was good.
Yeah.
Okay, so this next clip is from Greg Grogel, film producer. It's in season 2, episode 17. Greg Grogel likes to tell stories, how a kid followed his Olympic dream to become an Emmy-winning film producer. And Greg, whose mom is Martha Hoffman, and so he's part of the Hoffman clan. He would come back in the summertime and pick up some things. But in this case, he got laid off. The Olympics only happen so often, and they don't need Olympic crews interim years sometimes. And some of the younger people get laid off. So he got laid off. He came back to work at Hoffman Reed. So this is his impression.
This was after just working at the Olympics for NBC in Beijing, and came back and moved in with my grandpa and would get up with him in the morning, and we'd go to the Hoffman Reed, and my Uncle Chris gave me a job there. And I spent the whole fall of 2008 into the winter and here in Trenton, had a really special time. It was something that I'm so glad I was able to do and just understand, the family business and get to spend time with my cousin, Eric Hoffman. Then that spring, late winter, early spring, I got a call from NBC saying, "Hey, we're getting ready for the Winter Olympics. So you want to come back?" And I said, "Absolutely." So
let me check my schedule. I'm slinging some seed at 4, but I'll be there.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, sorry guys, I'm out of here. But was here for the harvest and, working and down at the Big Bends, and, I just had a great experience. But yeah, sometimes I would start telling stories to the guys I was working with, and they were like, "Wait a minute, you were just in Beijing 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and now you're here with me sitting at these Big Bends waiting for a semi to drop off some corn." It's like, yeah, I don't know how it happened either, but here I am.
True story. His autobiography comes out next month, titled "From Beijing to Trenton."
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. I mean, it was both humbling and it was also values. I mean, spending time with his grandpa was important. And just being in that and seeing what they did and respecting that hard work. But he was ready to grab that ring when it happened again. And in this case, the Olympic ring for his job. So that's cool. Okay, this one is Sierra Michaelis talking about stoplights and her experience in Mercer without those, and then in Columbia. I loved, you had a newspaper article I read, and you said that you absolutely hate stoplights because you grew up in a town without stoplights.
Yes. So my freshman year coming to Mizzou, obviously Mercer's so small, we don't have stoplights. We have one stop sign that nobody stops at. And so it was a big adjustment coming from Mercer to Columbia in 2013. I came to summer workouts. So I got here literally a week after I graduated and ran a few stoplights because I wasn't used to it.
So you got to know the campus police
yes.
early on?
Yeah, we became friends.
Trouble with stoplights.
Well, even if she gets pulled over in Mercer, she's not getting a ticket. Not Sierra Michaelis, right? Even if she runs the one stop sign, I don't think she's getting out of there with a ticket.
No.
Alan and I were talking about, just kind of having the job on the farm. And I was allowed to go to practice even if we were farming. And so I can remember one night it was getting about time for baseball practice, and I was bucking bales, and so I got to go to baseball practice, but then I had to come back after baseball practice, in the same clothes, wore blue jeans to baseball practice, and then come back and start, and then also kind of the way that we found different ways of entertaining ourselves by yourself and not with a group, and then when you go to high school and you're one of those farm kids. You guys were talking about some of the driving escapades and things that could happen. I remember when I was in high school, there wasn't many activities. And so everybody remembers, kids drag racing and all that. And so we for sure had our share of that at Meadville. But when you get bored, you got to spice things up a little bit. And so a couple of my friends that didn't have cars that were competitive drag racing forward decided that they should drag race backwards. And so that ended up, as you can imagine, into a lot of whipping around on the front end of the cars. And then one of them actually ended up at a fairly high rate of speed backing into a pole right in front of the bank in downtown Meadville. And it just so happened that he had a bumper sticker that said, "If you don't like the way I drive, stay off the sidewalk." And so it made me think of that when you guys were talking about
and that made the front page of the Meadville News for sure.
Made me think about it.
Above the sports section.
Definitely. Okay. So our next clip is Mark Curp talking about what it's like to run in high school.
During PE was the last hour of class, and so periodically I would give my clothes to my sisters, and I would change into my stuff, and I would, during PE, I'd run home. I'd run home and do chores, and I'd have chores done before they got home on the bus. Now, today, that would not happen.
Yeah.
Back then, that was okay. It was the last hour of school, and I was just going out and running. I'd run 5 miles home from school.
Hand his clothes off to his sister and just head home. Get there early to do chores. So that's how he did that. Okay. So then this is Andy Peterson again, and he's just talking about maybe how it translates small towns to...
It's not too dissimilar from growing up in Galt, where, You go to church and you go to school and you go to MFA on whatever morning to get supplies for dad, and you roll into Trenton to see whoever. It's just one of those, like, it's people. Everything is a people business.
Talking about how when he got into the athletic director business, there were a lot of translatable things that happen in small towns. You kind of learn that with small town living. You learn how to talk to adults. You learn how to take direction. You learn how to, maybe that translates when your coach is talking to you.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I'm particularly partial to farm kids and all of that, but I think that growing up in a small community, I think that adults, pay attention to the young people and probably engage them more, and it really, it just kind of comes natural. It's one of those sixth sense things like Alan was talking about.
The small town, and even Trenton, small town, for example, that really brings it out to me is my son. My grandkids go to Staley, so you know what size school they're going to. And he's not traveling so much now, but when he first went to work for Microsoft, he traveled over the world basically, but a lot of the United States. And he would tell people, he said, yeah, I lived, on a farm. And some of these people he worked with would look at him and say, what do you mean? You got a couple of chickens? And he'd say no, and he'd start showing them pictures, and they say, oh, wow, that's cool, show them the combine, and show them some of our tractors. Man, your dad has that? Yeah, it's amazing what the people in the city doesn't realize. And this is my favorite time of the year. As I farmed all my life, there's nothing better than getting in that big old green combine, putting an American flag on the back of it, and trucking right down Highway 6. I mean, there's just nothing better. People honking, people stopping, taking pictures of you while you're shelling corn, cutting beans, whatever, with that flag on there about sunset. I don't know how many times I've seen that. Small town USA, you can't do that on Interstate 80. You know what kind of crops are on the 80. It's just small town. You just can't beat it. The values, small town, if I could go back, the small town living when I was raised through the 70s, I wouldn't trade it for nothing.
I think part of it too is working together with people that are different ages on the farm. It's kind of all hands on deck. And so, from the time I was 11 years old, I was working with adults every day, and you learn how to work with different people and communicate with adults. And I think there's a lot of good in that too.
I think it translates to playing for your town and playing for your community too, because I came from a place where you didn't know who the board members. Are you serious? You don't know who the board members are for your school. You don't see your parents working at the stores or in town driving around. You don't see your friends' parents there. You come to a small town and everybody knows everybody, and you see everybody at Hy-Vee, and now you get that sense that when I put that uniform on for Trenton, I'm not just playing for me, but I'm playing for all those people that I know, as opposed to if you aren't kind of get lost in the shuffle in a big city school, you don't know any of those people, so you don't have that same community feel that you do in a small town.
My career was in home health care, so I was taking care of people's parents, and then they were coming to games, and I was coaching their grandkids. So you just have all these different intertwined relationships. Now, sports is important. We don't want to dismiss sports. They have so much to do, and we've talked about how this kind of stuff preps you for that. And here's Andy Peterson talking about the impact of sports in his life.
When I sat down on the basketball team, the guy to the right of me was from Indio, California, was born and raised in Hawaii. And the kid on the other side was Bilal Clarence, born and raised in Copenhagen, Denmark. Yeah, and as soon as you sat down, they were your teammates. They had the same goals that you do, same aspirations that you did. And again, for me, it's the lessons that are learned through sport. 98% of college athletes, when they get done playing here, their athletic careers are over. But they're more attractive to employers because they've been on a fast track for learning all these lessons: teamwork, sacrifice, time management, all these buzzwords, soft skills. You've learned them playing college sport. And so just taking that platform and trying to push it forward, I'm as competitive as anybody. I want to win, but it's not the end all be all. As soon as that becomes your identity, you've lost. And so at this level, that really spills through to kids and to parents. And to coaches. And that's why this place has just been everything to me since I got here in 2003. Rural, local kids, not even sport, but just college in general, can be a gateway just to experience and be exposed to all kinds of stuff. But for me, it's life-changing. My career, I got 3 degrees in agriculture that I'm not using, right? Mm-hmm. But it's because of sport. And it's not the winning and the losing. The winning and losing is fun, right? But it's everything else that came from it. Met my wife here. Some of the best friends I'll ever have in my life are here. I'm flying to Nashville tomorrow to go to the NCAA convention, and I've got 5 or 6 very close confidants that I can't wait to see because they're going through the same stuff that I'm going through or have. The networking, the people, competition, rising tide, lift all boats, that kind of thing. And it was for not much. It was, I think it was $2,500 scholarship that Coach Tapp offered me. And some of it was betting on myself.
I think I've heard that phrase. And I also remember in Mark Curp's episode, he talked about he got a scholarship that was $1,000, so people weren't doing it for money. And we're going to go here, and I'm going to go in a slightly different direction. Alan, this is you. Okay. So this is Alan talking about the fraternity, because in the world of sports, we talk about playing and we talk about coaching, but we talk about officiating, we talk about scouting, we talk about administration. In this clip, Alan, you talk about the fraternity of officiating and how rewarding that can be, and that's your team, if you will.
Jeff, you asked a question earlier, and I made a note. I wanted to kind of get back to it. How do we get people involved in this? And this might not move people, but it'll move, and I hope it don't get sentimental on you. It'll move me. I have lost probably 3 officials due to cancer that I've worked a lot with. And when you go to those funerals and you see 200 or 300 people that you've worked with wearing stripes, black and white stripes, that is gratifying. If I hadn't have spread my wings, little bitty Galt boy going out and getting bigger games, and I'll never forget a guy by the name of Jim Scaroni was my first time I ever got evaluated, and it was at Platte Valley's gym. He evaluated me, and I didn't know we had evaluators. He comes in at halftime and starts telling me this, and he says, "You could be something." And I said, "Well, I want to be something." And so he gave me some pointers. Danny Brown from Weston got a hold of me, and Danny Brown's one of the buddies we've lost. Scott Smith from St. Joe got a hold of me, and I worked with all those guys. Brad Tolson and Scott Smith and I went and worked a game in Albany, and Brad said he can't make a call because it's like being in a bird hunt, and you guys get the shot off before he get his whistle, So the friends, you don't make friends. You make brothers and sisters. And when we lose one, and we all show up at that funeral, and there's 200 or 300 of us, and that's why I'm not exaggerating. Those guys and gals that I've worked with, you never forget them. I worked I
remember a lot of people at Scott Essery's.
Oh, yeah. Huge.
It can be a place, like in Andy's case, Northwest Missouri opened up his world. It can be that fraternity and that brotherhood that you travel with, get in a car with, and go to a small gym somewhere else and go through those experiences.
I have not forgotten my high school classmates. And I see some of them a lot. But I tell you what, I still talk today to people that I've refereed with, went to the Final Four with, just out of the blue. I'll call them or they'll call me, and, "Hey, how you doing? I ain't seen you Bear for a year, doing great." I'm traveling around watching my granddaughter play volleyball now for Trenton High School, going to some of these old gyms. I was in Lathrop all Saturday. They had a tournament down there. I'm sitting there, and I told Linda, I said, "I remember making a call over there in that corner that whole section over there was ready to kill me." And I just went to Plattsburgh a couple of weeks ago, and I'm thinking, me and Scott Essery was in there one night when he moved half the crowd. I go to these gyms where she's playing at now that I've worked in, KCI conference. Of course, you don't play in a suburban conference, but a lot of the KCI conference gyms that I've worked in. And I think back, I can still remember the guys I worked with on those certain games. And can't remember what me and my buddies did in high school together, but I can remember working those games. And Brad will tell you, Scott Smith and I, Danny Brown, when we worked as a crew, we've had a lot of people tell us, "We didn't even know you guys were out there." And I'm not bragging. I'm just telling you, we enjoyed we did it. We didn't do it for the money. We did it for the kids and for the exercise and the love of the game.
You should look around some of those gyms. You probably have a plaque in your honor and hanging on some of those. For this call in the third quarter, and your picture of you, Yeah. But I think it goes back to the small town community thing too. Again, you go to some of these games in these small towns and you walk in and you know the officials by first name. Oh, we got Randy tonight. Yeah. We got Brad tonight. We got Alan tonight. You do that in the city. You don't know who the officials are. You don't know that, they come and shop at your store, or they know your kids, or your kids and their kids are friends, and it makes a difference. It really does.
And What to back up your words a little bit, and I don't want to hog all the mic, Brad, but 2004, my first time to the Final Four, I had a state championship game, girls Class 1 state championship game, and Brashear was playing in it. And I walked out on the floor to introduce, like we do to the coaches, and Sarah from Brashear says, "How did you get this game?" I said, "Shut up. I'm not here to help you win the game, but I'm glad I got it. How did you get this game? Somebody might hear me."
I know you. How are you? How'd you get in the building?
I'm going to cue up 2 last clips here, and then I'm going to kick it to you, Brad, because I think this will feed into some things you might want to talk about, what sports can do for people, what's your attitude about your work, and how it translates what you guys, the love you obviously still have for farming and rural life. And this is about a couple things here. Dr. Andy Peterson talking about whether it's really work if you love it, and Mark Curp talking about having fun, loving your sport, doing what you love. So just listen to these clips.
Coach Tapp kind of convinced me, hey, that's the real world. You can go work whenever you want. Well, I don't know that I've worked a day in my life yet. Our sports information director would tell you that. He's going to celebrate 25 years being SID, Colin McDonough, this year. And he said he would do this job for free. The paycheck's just a bonus for him. And I think that's part of it too, is if you find what you love, it doesn't matter what it is, it's a blast. Kid that loves sports and all of a sudden now his whole life revolves around sports, it really doesn't feel like a job.
Here's our last clip that we're going to use from Mark Curp.
I think if kids had more fun, and it'd be more like holding them back than pushing them forward. But that's the part of being burnt out. If you take some of the greatest athletes, they love to do it. And in my running, I would have run even if I wouldn't have gotten paid for it. Getting paid made it easier to do because I didn't have to hold another full-time job down for many years. Whatever you do in life, if you would do it because you love to do it versus whether you get paid or not.
Not a bad philosophy there, and it kind of feeds into, you don't know what the outcome is in farming. You don't know what the pay is going to be at the end of all the hard work. You don't know if this is going to be the good year or the bad year, or those kind of things, but you're totally invested in it, and you're not paying attention to that. You're doing what you love.
Yeah, I can't help but share kind of something that has come to me while we've been sitting here tonight. I think that there may not be as much of that kind of kids working on the farm thing as there used to be, but I think that sports can definitely be a great replacement for that. I know it has been for my kids, and Christy and I always said, as long as you're making grades and working hard and trying hard at your sports, and I think that they learned that work ethic through that. And I was thinking about how when you were playing Andy earlier and him talking about college being easy, I know when Ainsley got finished with her college career, she still had some more work to do on her degrees, and she talked about how easy it was once you weren't doing all of that work. But to speak to the clips that you just played, I think a lot of it comes down to getting to be with the people that you want to be with and spend time with them. And I think that when Alan was talking about refereeing with those good friends, that was a way for him to spend time together. And when I was talking earlier about, getting to work on the farm with my dad my whole life, and Alan getting to do that with his dad, getting to spend the time with the people that you love, and that part of it is something that sports really facilitates. And so that's kind of my last thoughts, I guess, on it.
Excellent. It just seems like it kind of does fit together. There's some elevating parts to farming. There's the teamwork parts. There's the family aspect. There's your community. There's also some humbling parts, and sports does that to you, as we all know.
Yeah, the sports, especially coming from Galt, I would come over and watch. Well, I got a good friend, Keith Van Devener. I'd come over here and watch him play football, watch him play basketball, and he'd vice versa come over home. It was just a different atmosphere, even though Trenton's still a pretty small town, but we was really small town, over there. Wasn't in a conference, never was in a conference in my life. Had nothing to shoot for other than just winning the game. A lot of times that didn't happen, but we had a lot of fun, a lot of dirt basketball, I guess what you'd call it. My dad did play on a dirt basketball at Galt before they built the gym, but I wouldn't trade my small town root for nothing. And Dr. Andy Peterson, he never had a sister, but he was real close. My daughter Katrina and him graduated the same year, and if you said anything bad about Katrina, you had Dr. Andy to whip. He's a good dude. The Peterson family and us, we're pretty tight.
Well, one of the joys, Chris, of us doing this is the people we've met and just getting a little glimpse into their character. And there's really high character people. It's not surprising that the people that did really well had a lot of dedication. They put in a lot of effort, and they had a lot of support.
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to the threat of carrying 5-gallon buckets. I mean, that's got to be where all points.
Motivating factor.
Right. But in all seriousness, the people that I've met in coaching and officiating and being athletic director that have the core values of the small town are the ones that you want to work with, whether it comes down to parents or officials or kids. When you have that core value system of hard work and teamwork, and I know what it means to communicate and get along and problem solve, all those underlying tones that we talked about tonight make for a good person, a good athlete, a good official, a good coach. And so tying those things in Northwest Missouri together, farming and sports, has been a lot of fun.
It has been a lot of fun. And one of the skills that I continue to have to learn is time management, because we go long on these episodes. So I'm going to have to shut this one down. And I just want to thank Alan and Brad for joining us. It's been a lot of fun hearing some of these stories and kind of weaving the idea of farming, rural communities, and how it builds roots that allow people to succeed in the world of sports. And I want to thank everybody for listening to Show Me Sports Legacies.